Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana, and it is a great day to be a fan of sports in the state of Indiana. It is Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. Tomorrow night, at the time of recording this, Notre Dame is going to take on Penn State in the semifinals of the college football playoff. We have a slew of games tonight. The Pacers play the Bulls, Butler plays Providence, IU plays USC. We'll talk about a couple of those games today. We've got a busy show today, a lot to talk about, even though the Colts are done, right? Even though IU football, Purdue football is done, we're still barely working into conference play. In college basketball, we have a lot to talk about today. So I mentioned the Notre Dame game. We're going to preview Notre Dame versus Penn State. It's one of the first things. That's the first thing we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Colts firing Gus Bradley, what that means, why there isn't any more significant change occurring at the top. We're going to talk about Purdue basketball, the state of Purdue basketball, because they have been fantastic recently. We're going to talk about what they did last weekend. We're going to preview the weekend ahead for them. They play Rutgers tomorrow night at the time of recording this. We're going to talk about the Indiana Pacers. They have a pivotal weekend coming up as well, a couple big-time games, and then we're going to preview and predict the NFL wildcard rounds. Those, what would it be, 6 games occurring then. But I want to start with Notre Dame versus Penn State because that game is, in my opinion, the better game of the two semifinals and could be a game, well, definitely is a game that determines who goes to the national championship, but very well could determine which coach is viewed better, perhaps is viewed in a more positive light in the country between Marcus Freeman and James Franklin. Both are elevating, and both have elevated their programs to a level that they have not yet reached yet. Specifically, if Marcus Freeman wins this game for Notre Dame, or at least leads his team to a victory, and they go on to the national championship, they will do something that they have not done in the playoff era. So let's preview this game, right? Notre Dame versus Penn State. It's an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. Really, at the end of the day, Notre Dame, they beat out Indiana and Georgia to get here. Penn State cruised past SMU and Boise State. So Notre Dame, resoundingly, had a more difficult road getting here because they had to beat the SEC champion on a neutral site, and of course that game had some external circumstances surrounding it. They had to beat Indiana, who arguably are frauds, but Indiana certainly, at least according to me, had a fantastic season and were deserving their spot in the playoff. And Indiana, across the board, still a difficult opponent. Notre Dame had to win that game at home. Penn State, they beat out SMU, the arguably the second best team in the ACC, perhaps, and Boise State, who won the Mountain West, that G5 team that slid into the 3 seed. So Penn State cruises past those two arguably inferior opponents, and now they have their toughest game of the playoff. And what is notable about that is because Penn State has not beaten a team at this level this year or in most years, right? Penn State, they take on Ohio State, they lose. Take on Oregon in that big-time game, they lose a close one in the Big Ten championship game. And then in the playoffs, you would think that they would have to go through a couple more highly difficult opponents, and that just wasn't the case for Penn State. They had a very easy road to the semifinals. We expected them to be here. They were favored handsomely in both games. And now Penn State plays Notre Dame, a fellow top 5 team, another team that Penn State has typically been incapable of taking down in past big games, especially under James Franklin, and now they have the opportunity to do it. Neither one of these teams has made the championship game in the college football playoff area. Penn State has not made the college football playoff in the college football playoff era. They expand to 12 teams. Penn State gets in. They probably would have been in anyway, even if it was just 4. Now they're in the semifinals. Now they have an opportunity to elevate even further and do something else they haven't done and make the championship. Notre Dame is in the same position. So there's some injuries that are going to be significant to this game. Abdul Carter, I got a CBS Sports notification about an hour ago that Abdul Carter is going to be a game-time decision. When I was writing this Google Doc, it said that he was going to be optimistic to play, perhaps. But defensive end for Penn State, Abdul Carter, is a game-time decision. We await that decision. Really, that's going to have a major impact on this game as a whole, an impact on the pass rush, an impact on the run defense. Danny Dennis-Sutton, I expect to be back as well for Penn State. A.J. Harris, a corner for the Nittany Lions, is unclear at this time. Notre Dame, they're still going to miss Riley Mills. He's still gone, but Jeremiah Love is going to play. I said he was expected to be fine a couple days ago. He is going to be fine. Jeremiah Love's going to be a play. Whether or not he's full strength is going to be a different question that we have to weigh, but Jeremiah Love will play. in this game against Penn State tomorrow night. I want to talk about Notre Dame, obviously, Indiana Sports Show. Let's go over Notre Dame. Let's go over how they can win, how they can beat Penn State despite the injuries. I want to talk about defense because Penn State's number one target, their number one threat, their number one key to victory is Tyler Warren. That tight end for Penn State, he's going to be present in the NFL. He's going to have a major impact for some team on Sundays. I would say for one of the LA teams, whether it's the Rams or the Chargers, I think he would fit great there. But regardless, Notre Dame's going to have to take away Tyler Warren. And they're not going to be able to take away Tyler Warren because he is just that unstoppable. But they're going to have to find a way to limit him, isolate, and contain Tyler Warren. He has 98 catches on the year for 1,158 yards, 8 touchdowns. He averages 11.8 yards per reception. Last week against Boise State, he had 6 catches for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if you do the math there, he's averaging over a first down per catch then as well. It's a different style of play, and that's what most worries me about Notre Dame in this situation because their secondary is top 5 in the country. They have one of the best pass defenses in the country across the board, but the type of players, the type of receivers that they're defending, the type of quarterbacks that are throwing the ball to them, it's different than this combination of Drew Aller and Tyler Warren. Last week, I saw Notre Dame had no problem against Georgia from a secondary perspective or really at all in that game, but from a secondary perspective for the Notre Dame, they really had no trouble with Georgia. And yeah, Gunnar Stockton had some big-time plays. They had some pop moments. They had some flashy drives, had some big throws to Arian Smith or whoever else was receiving the ball. Lawson Lucky, another option there. But those receivers are more downfield threats, right? Arian Smith, absolutely a downfield threat. Feels like a Josh Downs, feels like an Alec Pierce, right? Tyler Warren is big, he's bulky, he's a tight end, he can barrel through you, and his golden spot of the field is 8 or 10 yards down the field, as evidenced by his 11.8 yards per reception, rather than 20, 30, 40, 50 yards down the field, right? So Gunnar Stockton in Georgia, they would pop down the field, they would flash, they would put some throws deep into enemy territory, and Notre Dame suffered a few of those, but for the most part, they did a pretty good job defending those receivers and keeping that passing game at bay. Tyler Warren is different. He's going to be extremely effective in yards after the catch, right? He's going to be extremely effective yards after contact as well. Tyler Warren's a player like that it's going to take multiple guys to bring down, and that's someone at this level Notre Dame has not quite been faced yet. It's a different style of play, right? Penn State, their best players are Tyler Warren and those 2 running backs and their quarterback, right? Penn State doesn't have those wideouts that Georgia has or some of these other opponents Notre Dame has had to face. They don't have the wideout strength that maybe they could if they were a different team at the top here, like Ohio State with Jeremiah Smith. You look at Texas as well with Matthew Golden. Penn State's a different type of team. They're going to run the ball. They're going to throw to Warren. They're going to keep the game close to the trenches, right? Those 22 players are going to be bunched closer to the offensive and defensive line than usual in Notre Dame games. So Notre Dame's going to have to stop that efficient drive from moving, right? Whenever Penn State has the football, they're going to run the ball for 4, they're going to run the ball for 6, they're going to throw it for 12 to Tyler Warren, right? Maybe they take a couple deep shots. They definitely did try against Boise State, but for the most part, their success is going to be on the grounds, close to the trenches, to Tyler Warren or their running backs, and that is how Penn State typically wins. So the question for Notre Dame is how they're going to stop that, because if Penn State just keeps rolling, and if they're going for 4 yards, 6 yards, 12 yards, and they're marching down the field and scoring, they're going to continue to march down the field and score. And Notre Dame, if they aren't able to stop them, they're not able to stop them, and it's going to be a shootout very, very quick, maybe more of a slow burn shootout. But Notre Dame's going to have to turn the ball over, and they happen to be one of the best teams in the country at doing that. Their turnover margin is fantastic. They take care of the football, and they take it away from other teams, right? That's how they beat Georgia. There was more to how they beat Georgia, but certainly part of it was taking the ball away from Gunnar Stockton. They forced him to fumble twice. They stripped the ball from him twice. Those turned into Notre Dame scores at times, but certainly that took away Georgia's drive opportunities to go down to the other side of the field and score. And that swung the game majorly for Notre Dame. They won the turnover battle 2-0 against the SEC champion, and they beat the SEC champion. Now, against the arguably second best team in the Big Ten, or at this point with how Ohio State is playing, maybe the third. A team in the Big Ten, very strong. Big Ten has outplayed the SEC this year. Still, Penn State, regardless, a top 4 team in the country and a team in the semifinals, they're going to have to turn the ball over against them. If they can, Notre Dame has a very strong chance of winning. If they don't, then maybe you're looking at a situation where Penn State marches down the field and score drive after drive after drive. The other aspect of this defensively for me is critical down success, right? You have to slow drives to a halt because, like I said, if Penn State rolls, they'll win. If they're able to run the ball for 4 yards, able to run the ball for 6 yards, able to throw to Tyler Warren for 12, able to throw to Tyler Warren for 8, right? If they're able to just continue marching down the field, first down, not forcing themselves into very many third down situations or second and long situations, Notre Dame's going to be at a bad spot. Critical down success. What I mean by critical downs is third downs, fourth downs, really every down at this point, but third down, fourth down, and in the red zone, right? If it's ever 3rd and 3, Penn State should not be getting a first down. Notre Dame has to hold strong there, has to get the stop because it's those critical downs where you stop drives. Because next thing you know, if it's 3rd and 3 and they run it the middle and they tackle for loss, right? 3rd and 4, 4th and 4 rather, now they're kicking the ball away to you, right? But if they get those 3 yards, it's another first down. You say, okay, now they're 10 yards closer and they have 4 more opportunities to do the same thing. And Penn State is efficient enough on offense to where they're going to be able to do that most likely. At least they have been for the majority of the year. And that includes the game against Oregon, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So third downs, fourth downs if you're in that situation, red zone plays as well. That's where Notre Dame has to hold strong and has to keep Penn State to field goals or preferably punts. If you can attack Drew Aller the way you attacked Gunnar Stockton the week prior, fantastic, right? If you can force those 2nd and 13 situations where Drew Aller is forced to throw down the field, fantastic. If you can get out to an early lead where Drew Aller is forced to throw the ball down the field more, fantastic. That just has to be what actually happens, and it starts for me with Notre Dame with slowing Penn State's drives to a halt. This will probably be a slower game. It'll probably be a more low-scoring game. It'll probably be slow-paced, and they're going to have to really roll themselves out to success. It starts with slowing down those Penn State drives, and it's one thing to slow them down. It's another thing to stop them, and stopping them happens on third down. Stopping them happens on fourth down. Stopping them happens in the red zone when they're forced to kick a field goal, something like that. That's where Notre Dame has to have success, and if they are marching down the field, start taking the ball away. Interceptions, fumbles, whatever you can do. Penn State's a great team. They take care of the ball as well, but Notre Dame's been able to force Georgia to lose the turnover battle by 2, right? That's the key to me for Notre Dame defensively. Now, the other side of it is offensively, because it's one thing to slow down another team and stop them from scoring. It's another thing to keep up with them and score yourself. Once the defense gives the offense chances to score, let's just assume that the defense is getting stops. Let's just assume that the defense is locking down on Tyler Warren, things like that. Now it's time for the offense to work, right? Penn State, number 8 in run defense. That's a problem. That's one of, if not the best run defenses that Notre Dame has played all year long. I suppose Indiana isn't an exception, but Indiana's soft schedule makes you sort of start to question their statistical ranking in that way. But Penn State's number 21 in pass defense. So they're number 20, they're top 25 in both categories defensively, right? So it's going to be tough regardless. Last game, they primarily won without Jeremiah Love, and that's partially because of the injury and the banged upness, but Riley Leonard outrushed Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love was not the reason why Notre Dame beat Georgia, as maybe we would have expected him to be. So Riley Leonard down the field is going to have to be hitting some of those mid-range throws because, again, Penn State's run defense, and whether or not they have Abdul Carter and Danny Dennis-Hutton is going to be significant in that way. But Jeremiah Love cannot be the one leg that they have to stand on to win a game. And we know that they can win different ways because they just beat the SEC champion and the number 2 overall seed, Georgia, by winning different ways, right? Riley Leonard had 90 passing yards, 70, 80 rushing yards, but still outrushed Jeremiah Love on the game. They didn't need to depend on Jeremiah Love to keep that offense churning against Georgia, so it's reasonable to suggest that they'll be able to do the same thing against Penn State. But it comes on to Riley Leonard once again. Riley Leonard really was the MVP against Georgia. He's got to be the MVP against Penn State, right? Down the field, is it Bo Collins? Is it Jaden Greathouse? Someone's going to have to step up as the primary target for Riley Leonard, and that's why I'm nervous for Notre Dame, right? The defense, first of all, needs to contain Warren enough, and they're not going to be able to. Penn State's going to be scoring, and the offense is going to roll through him regardless. But can they contain Warren enough to keep up, knowing their offense may be a bit slow to start? And it goes both ways there. Will their offense be able to score enough to outpace Tyler Warren as their defense tries to figure out exactly how to stop him and slow him down? And conversely, is the defense going to be able to do exactly that while the offense is trying to score? Both sides of the ball have to be clicking on all cylinders right now. And if they are, Notre Dame 1,000% can beat Penn State. I would love to see, I think Notre Dame's favored as well. I would love to see Notre Dame beat Penn State here. I'm just nervous because I don't know if they're going to be able to stop Tyler Warren or at least slow him down enough in order for their offense to be able to beat Penn State and dissect Penn State and really put the points on the board and start running up the score on Penn State, because their offense is not quite built to crack that specific defense. Georgia was middle of the pack in run defense. They were much lower in that category. It's not a vintage Georgia defense, and Notre Dame was really able to stick it to the man in that way. Can they do the same against Penn State? We're about to find out. Again, I think Notre Dame is fantastic. I think they're an incredible team. I think they can win the national championship, especially if they have the right matchup in that final game. However, now is the time where they're facing a team that maybe isn't the best team left, but certainly is a team that they match up the worst against when you consider Tyler Warren, when you consider that pair of running backs, and when you consider Drew Aller. So turnovers and special teams could be what bails Notre Dame out. That's essentially how they beat Georgia, right? They had that kick return touchdown. They had 2 fumbles. They turned some of those into scores as well. So maybe they just turn the ball over. Maybe Penn State loses the turnover battle by 2, 3, or 4 turnovers, and Notre Dame just steamrolls to a victory once again. Or Penn State takes care of the football. They march down the field. They score effortlessly. And Notre Dame, I don't think their offense is going to quite be that high-powered, especially if Penn State is playing well. So all in all, right, Notre Dame is going to have to slow down Warren enough, and on those critical downs, halt those drives. If you can force a 3rd and 5, that has to be a successful down for Notre Dame. And if it's not, and if it's consistently not, Penn State's just going to win this football game because Tyler Warren and those running backs and Drew Aller are just too good. Now, Riley Leonard is going to have to play perfectly on offense to stay alive against this defense. At the end of the day, Penn State is top 25 in both categories. It's going to be difficult to beat this team no matter how you attempt to do it. So for Notre Dame across the board, on offense, you have to get out to a quick start, and if you don't, you at least have to be slowing down Tyler Warren. It's complementary football. They need one. If one side of the ball is going to be struggling, the other one has to be on it. And if they're both going to be struggling, Penn State's going to win this football game, and that's going to be all there is to it. I think this game's going to be a defensive battle. I think both teams are going to struggle to score. I don't think either one will break past 30, and I think Penn State's going to win it down the stretch just because if they're ever in a situation with 6 minutes left, down by 4 or up by 4, I just think Penn State's offense is going to be able to move down the field with ease and going to be able to take down Notre Dame in that way. Tyler Warren, I just think, is going to become too much for Notre Dame to deal with. And I hate to say that. I love Notre Dame. I want them to win this game. I'd love to pick them to win this game. I just think it's going to be Penn State. And that, honestly, is exactly why. That would be huge. This would be a huge victory for both teams. I think Penn State, theoretically, if they were to make the national championship, that would make James Franklin one of the better, officially now, in terms of resume, one of the better coaches in the Big Ten, although he already is. He'd be a more nationally notable coach, maybe more reminiscent of Kirby Smart. Because really, when you look at the last 10 years of Penn State football, you see a lot of success. And a lot of that is overlooked because they've never actually made the 14 playoff. They've never actually won the championship. But if James Franklin finally does it, I think the perception of him is going to change drastically, especially if he beats Ryan Day in that national championship game. No idea if that's going to happen. No idea if that's going to be how it goes. Shouldn't predict that, anything like that. I hope Notre Dame wins. I just think it's going to be Penn State because Tyler Warren, I think, is just going to be too much. And considering all the other factors at play, I don't think Notre Dame's going to be able to outscore the Nittany Lions. Okay, let's talk about the Colts. That was a long preview there. It's worthy of it, certainly. Notre Dame-Penn State, going to be a fantastic game, the best game of the weekend. The Colts fired Gus Bradley on just a couple days ago. Defensive coordinator, we expected him to be gone. Jim Irsay released a statement effectively touching on the idea that his general manager, Chris Ballard, and head coach Shane Steichen were going to stay. It was implied that Anthony Richardson was likely going to remain on the team as well, but he did not mention Gus Bradley by name, and just a day later, Gus Bradley is fired, or at least they part ways in whatever way that you want to describe that as. Like I said, this was expected. Something on the sidelines in the press box next year is going to be different, right? Even if Chris Ballard is retained, even if Shane Steichen's retained, even if Anthony Richardson is retained, even if Jim Irsay comes back, which obviously he would, something's going to change, and that's going to be the defensive coordinator, and that is going to be significant because the offense didn't do half bad against the Giants, but we let the Giants score over 40, right? The offense, incredible against the Titans. Titans had a chance because we let them score over 30, primarily in the second half. So Gus Bradley's going to be fired, and the question now is who could replace him, right? Who could replace Gus Bradley as defensive coordinator on the Indianapolis Colts. There's a lot of possible job candidates. The Indy Star did a really great comprehensive piece on this. They put like 8 to 10 names on there. I thought that was incredible. First of all, I want to go over what my criteria for a new defensive coordinator would be. Here is what I want to see from a defensive coordinator. I want them to be oriented in the pass defense. I want them to be oriented in pass coverages. I want that to be their primary area of concern or their primary area of expertise, perhaps, especially if this is paired with a splash signing at defensive back. I saw a rumor, Marshawn Lattimore to the Colts. Would that be great? Yes. The one thing about Chris Ballard, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot the last couple of days, is we got Stephon Gilmore. And I remember when that signing happened, I was a freshman, and I remember being I was on air. I was live on the radio. I was talking about sports, and I was talking about the NFL draft, I believe. And then right then, in that moment, there's a couple guys coming down the hallway. They're showing through the window on their phone, Stephon Gilmore to the Colts, and we freaked out on air. And I remember Chris Ballard, that being a move that he made that he's been largely afraid of for the majority of his tenure, right? Chris Ballard he's typically a guy that drafts very well, but he's never a guy to potentially make moves in free agency or make some of those blockbuster trades. You see other teams making massive moves, signing massive deals for key players, key receivers, key quarterbacks, key defensive backs, things like that. And Chris Ballard just hasn't done that. And the one time he really did, the one time he pulled someone from another team was Stephon Gilmore, and that was fantastic until it wasn't. And Stephon Gilmore had some injury problems and really fell off, and that wasn't what we wanted to see. But if we had prime Stephon Gilmore on this Colts team right now, our secondary would be totally fine. And maybe not totally fine, but with a new defensive coordinator and prime Stephon Gilmore, we'd be fantastic. So the question is, can we find another free agency or through the trading block? Can we find another defensive back like that who's going to be incredible and top 10, top 15, top 20 in the league at their position, and pair that with the defensive coordinator that can can scheme up pass coverages and really use that pass defense to their advantage? That's what I want to see. I want to see a defensive coordinator come in that's oriented in the passing game, and I want to see a splash signing at defensive back, whether that's Marshawn Lattimore, whether that's anybody else. I mean, I wanted Terrion Arnold in the draft. I remember I wanted a corner in the draft, real bad. We got an edge rusher. That was great, and that really sets up our front seven. Latu is, of course, fantastic. But I want to see a pass defense-oriented defensive coordinator, and I want to see a splash signing at defensive back. We have talent up front. I think we're largely fine up front. Maybe you can add some more depth pieces or some rotation players, but what we want to see improved is the secondary. I want to boost in the secondary with a defensive coordinator that knows how to use a good secondary and another key player in the NFL to make that secondary great. We're going to need someone that's going to be able to remedy the discipline and effort issues at play, right? That's one of the major issues with the Colts. Pat McAfee has spoken a lot on that recently. Steichen prefers the ideology of limiting explosive plays rather than being aggressive, right? And fundamentally what that could break down to is if you blitz, you leave open space. So it's aggressive to blitz and get after the quarterback, but if you're playing an elite quarterback, as sometimes we often do have to, then you're leaving open space for explosive plays behind the blitz. So theoretically, right, if you rush for and drop the rest of the team basically into coverage, then you're limiting those explosive plays while still getting some level of pressure on the quarterback. That's the concept that Steichen prefers. So it'd be nice if there was someone that was compatible with that. Now, whether or not that's the right concept and the right ideology to have in the NFL this year in 2025 or have in the NFL at all is up for debate, but that's what Steichen prefers, and as long as Steichen is on this team, that's what we sort of would like to work around, right? So I got 4 names, 3 real names and 1 kind of a reachy name that I want to bring up as people that I think could replace Gus Bradley as defensive coordinator of the Indianapolis Colts. Number 1 is Chris Hewitt. Chris Hewitt, Ravens assistant head coach, secondary coach, passing game coordinator. He's a no-nonsense guy. He was a big hitter, kind of like Ray Lewis, if you want to look at the Ravens. And he maintains that mindset, right? So this is where I could see the discipline and effort issues potentially being fixed when you have Chris Hewitt in the saddle there. He's also secondary focused. I think that the Ravens assistant head coach, anyone that's named an assistant head coach as a secondary coach, has got to be great at their job. I think if we can steal Chris Hewitt from the Ravens, we could potentially be in a much better position moving forward. The second one that jumps out to me is Aubrey Pleasant. He's the Rams assistant head coach, defensive backs coach, passing game coordinator. He's effectively the head coach during the preseason. I think this is really cool from the Rams. Sean McVay basically takes a step back in the preseason and says, okay, it's Coach Pleasant, it's Aubrey Pleasant, it's his time to sort of coach the team during the preseason, and that typically goes very, very well. He's a leader of men. Sean McVay loves him, and he's passing game oriented. So potentially a great leader, potentially has experience at being on the sidelines, doing a consistent amount of work there live as the game is occurring, and he's passing game oriented. Aubrey Pleasant from the Rams is a great option as well. Daniel Bullock is the 49ers defensive backs coach. His team, the 49ers, have been elite at intercepting the football. They're one of the best at the league at intercepting passes. He's lauded by players. Daniel Bullock potentially could be someone that we look at. I would say the Colts secondary would appreciate more fundamental reworks, right? Things like tackling and giving up explosive plays after the catch are what are most significantly harming the Colts right now. Turnovers are largely more okay, but that's splitting hairs. Daniel Bullock would be incredible regardless. Those are my top three. Chris Hewitt, Aubrey Pleasant, Daniel Bullock are the best hires I can think of in the NFL right now. And a fourth one that I just want to throw out there is Ron Rivera. He has said in some interview, some press conference of some kind, that he misses the schematic and teaching side of football. The part of being a head coach has to do with personnel and roster composition and things like that is maybe a little bit more off what he wants for his life right now, theoretically. But he said that he misses the schematic and teaching side of football. He's had 7 top 10 defenses in the NFL in the past. Maybe he's a bit too strong of a personality or a power. I only say that because he's used to being a head coach, right? So it'd be essentially like having 2 head coach type personalities in the room, which could work out because Shane Steichen's offense, Ron Rivera is defense, but maybe that adds to some sort of a clash of power or some upsetment of balance, things like that. Regardless, I think those are my 4. Chris Hewitt, Aubrey Pleasant, Daniel Bullock, Ron Rivera. Those are the 4 guys that I most have in mind as who could replace Gus Bradley as defensive coordinator, and I'm excited to see if any one of those guys ends up getting hired this offseason. Either way, the Colts have playmakers. We just need to find someone that is able to use them, and I think we should add another defensive back as well. I think, in my opinion, the perfect formula for this offseason defensively is new defensive coordinator, again, that can revamp some of the discipline and effort issues, can revamp the passing game and some of those pass coverages, and use the players he has in a better way. And I want to add a free agent corner through free agency or some trade, and I want to add a safety, namely maybe someone like Malachi Starks through the draft. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. That's what I want to see from the Colts. Because, again, we have playmakers, primarily up front. Laiatu Latu, Zaire Franklin, DeForest Buckner, Kwity Paye. The front 7 has a lot of talent that, in my opinion, certainly is more than likely to return. EJ Speed is in a contract year. We'll see about him. But we'll see how many free agents with expiring contracts can come back. I hope to be finally seeing change and improvement, and it's essential that this new hire, whoever it is a success if the Colts are really going to elevate without blowing up the franchise first, because that's an outcome, right? One possible outcome for the next couple of years is the Colts just say, we're blowing it up. Chris Ballard's gone, and that's what a lot of people are calling for this year. Chris Ballard's gone, Shane Steichen's gone, Anthony Richardson. Get rid of everybody, like Pat McAfee said. Get rid of everybody, have a few core players to bring back, and then just reload and see where we can go from here, right? And I don't want that, because that is, and maybe that's the long-term best option, but that would be completely gutting this team, right? We'd be tanking and then trying to rebuild from the ground up. Sometimes that's the right approach. I just think that right now with a team that is 8-9, 9-8 every year, maybe if we find a way to use, if Chris Ballard and if Jim Irsay are right and that they do like their guys and they are close to elevating, if we're going to trust that, and that's very hard to do, but if we're going to trust that, then maybe if we have the right defensive coordinator and we have a couple more pieces in the secondary, maybe this team is going to be able to reload and improve from here. We've got to see some more gutsy moves from Chris Ballard, and we've got to see a better defense, and we've got to see that through coaching and through personnel. I'm interested to see if either one improves this offseason and by how much and what that means for the future, because at the end of the day, all I want is good Colts defense and good Colts football. Okay, let's talk about Purdue basketball. We're running long here. We're already hitting 30 minutes, which is fantastic, honestly, that we have enough to say about all of these things. Let's talk about Purdue basketball. Purdue has been absolutely stellar recently. They beat Minnesota on the road by 20. They beat Northwestern by 18 last weekend as well. Braden Smith had 22 against Northwestern. Fletcher Loyer had 24 against Minnesota. Those two are really emerging as a tandem of backcourt stars, the two of them together. And what's great about that is if one of them's off, the other one can carry the load. If the other one's off, one of them can carry the load. And that's what we've seen in some games in the past. Loyer had the best game against Minnesota. Braden Smith had a fantastic game against Northwestern. So if one's having an off night, the other one can still shine. And if they're both shining, Purdue can beat anybody. They can beat absolutely anybody. And that's a really dangerous combination, especially because they have had so much time together, right? They're both juniors. They both came in as freshmen. They started as freshmen together. They have a lot of playing time together at Purdue. They played against each other in high school. Braden Smith went to Westfield. Fletcher Loyer went to Homestead, right? A lot of history between these guys. And now we're in a situation where both of them are playing perfectly. They're playing fantastic. And Purdue's blowing out teams much lower than them in the Big Ten standing, perhaps, but we're ramping up to a moment where we're going to play a team like Oregon on the road, and that's where those two players are going to come in the most clutch. Let's talk about the standings, because Purdue is currently technically fifth in the Big Ten. They're 3-1. There are 5 teams with 3 wins right now. Michigan State and Michigan are 3-0 in the conference. Indiana, Illinois, and Purdue are all 3-1. UCLA is 2-1, although I believe UCLA lost to Michigan last night, so they should be 2-2. Oregon is 2-2 as well. They're also threats to contend and sort of reach up there. Nebraska is a casually strong opponent right now. Streaky team in the Big Ten. They're not ranked, but they could be. A couple big wins away from being ranked, and they're going to play Purdue on Sunday afternoon. That's going to be a big-time game to watch. Purdue is one of the only teams in the Big Ten at this time that has not yet played a team at the top with them, right? Illinois has played UCLA or Oregon, whichever one it was, but Purdue and IU really are the only teams that haven't played another team in that collection. So Purdue has not played IU, they have not played Illinois, they have not played Michigan State, they have not played Michigan, they have not played UCLA, they have not played Oregon. They will play Oregon in just a couple weeks. But regardless, Purdue right now is up there in the mix, 3-1. Of course, that lost to Penn State, but they've won every other conference game since then. They're one that has not yet played a team at that caliber in the Big Ten, and that's going to be very interesting to watch, especially when they have those road games in conference. So we'll talk about their upcoming schedule in a second, but waiting for that opportunity when Purdue plays a top team in the Big Ten is going to be very, very interesting. According to Joe Lunardi, they're on the 6th line. Jerry Palm also has them as a 6th seed. The AP poll has Purdue at number 20 in the country, so the back of the 5 line, I suppose, the very last 5 seed, if you want to look at it from that perspective. Regardless, safely in the field, Purdue is right now, and if they stay the course, they will be safely on the top half of the NCAA tournament field. They're still contending for a Big Ten championship, regular season and tournament. They could make a tournament run in the Big Ten tournament and also in the NCAA tournament. So Purdue's in a spot right now where they're one of the top teams in the Big Ten, but they have not yet been challenged in the same way that some of the other top teams in the Big Ten have, right? All of them at least played one team in that range except for Purdue and IU. IU plays Illinois on the 14th. Purdue plays Oregon on the 17th, if I'm not mistaken, of January. Very big time week next week for both schools as we kind of get another litmus test of seeing where they stand in the Big Ten and where they stand in the country as a whole. That's next week. Let's talk about this week. Purdue on Thursday night, they're going to go to Rutgers, and that's a trap spot. And we know that's a trap spot because you can think back to a guy named Ron Harper Jr. that did some pretty nasty things to Purdue a couple years in a row in Piscataway. Purdue won by 8 in that building last season. Dylan Harper, the freshman, is on this roster. He's related to Ron Harper Jr. Be careful is all I'll say. Harper has missed some time with injury. He'll likely be back by Thursday, we would think. But, Dylan Harper has been injured. He's either going to be out for this game or he's going to be slowly coming back and working his way back into team activities. Dylan Harper, fantastic freshman, really boosted Rutgers' recruiting, right, when he committed there. That's a trap spot. At Rutgers, be careful. Go on the road. Pick up another Big Ten win. It's every single win on the road in the Big Ten is absolutely pivotal, and they're all very difficult to achieve. Even though Rutgers isn't necessarily in the top upper echelon of the Big Ten, still a very difficult game to go on the road and win. We hope that they're able to do so. After that, on Sunday afternoon, they come back home to Mackey Arena and they play Nebraska. That's a decent opponent. Nebraska's 12-2. And I know we're still at the point in the year where teams have played a cupcake schedule, right? They just got through winter break where they racked up some wins over some teams that may not even be D1, right? Or definitely mid-major team, average mid-major conference teams, right? So Nebraska 12-2. We're still early on in the year, but they're in the mix at the top of the conference, right? They're coming off a win over number 15 UCLA. They could be a real contender. Nebraska could be a team capable of becoming in that mix of ranked teams at the top of the Big Ten and really pushing for a title. I don't think they'll win a title, but Nebraska is in that mix for sure. If there's a top 6 in the Big Ten right now, if it's Michigan State, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, UCLA, Oregon, Nebraska, that's 8. That's 8 teams up there that really are difficult to play, especially on the road. Fortunately, Purdue gets them home this week. But Nebraska is a very tough opponent. And this happens multiple weeks in a row where they'll play one game on the road against an inferior opponent and one game at home against a team more closer to their level. And it's been very difficult. They've been able to do it, but it's been very difficult to win both. I didn't do it that one week where they went to Penn State and lost and then played Maryland at home and managed to outpace them, but that game was high scoring and close in its own right. So the Rutgers game is a potential trap situation. The Nebraska game is a very quality win, in my opinion. Even though Nebraska is not ranked, you could overlook it, but they're 12-2, and they're right there squarely at the top of the Big Ten right now. And with quality wins, they beat UCLA, who's number 15 at the time. Nebraska's a tough opponent. Purdue has a big-time game against them on Sunday. But really all we're doing is ramping ourselves up to the Oregon game, right? Next week is going to be a huge week, like I said, in college basketball in this state. Indiana hosts Illinois on the 14th. Purdue goes to Oregon on the 18th. Those are their first tests against some of those big-time, high-quality conference opponents. This would be Purdue's most prominent resume bullet point if they were able to win. Purdue doesn't have a truly that's not true. They don't have a truly big-time conference win. They, of course, beat Alabama. They have some quality wins out of conference, and that's fantastic. And shout out to Matt Painter for scheduling so tough to make that happen. But Purdue doesn't have a big-time win over a conference opponent yet at the top, in that top 8 upper echelon of the Big Ten. And the Big Ten's deep, right? There may be 18 teams in this thing, but almost half of them, it feels like, are capable of having a bye in the Big Ten tournament or being in that top 4. So regardless, when you look at college basketball right now, and you look at the Big Ten right now, and you look at Purdue right now, everything that feels like they're doing is warming themselves up to Oregon on January 18th. Just like IU, they're looking to amass a 4-game winning streak leading into that game. It's very similar schedule makeups for IU and Purdue right now. Indiana has 4 games against some similarly equal opponents, right? They're slowly ramping themselves up in terms of quality of opponent to hit to hit Illinois. Theoretically, they could have a 4-game winning streak in conference when they play Illinois with the opportunity to, with a massive exclamation point, make it 5. Purdue's doing the same thing, right? They picked up 2 wins already. Now they're looking to move forward, pick up 2 more this weekend against Rutgers and Nebraska, and set themselves up for an opportunity to beat Oregon with an exclamation point and make it 5 wins in a row in conference. Either way, when they walk into that arena, it's going to be a very difficult game, and this weekend is important to ramp up the sort of to ramp up the excitement for that game and ramp up the momentum for the Oregon game, because the schedule is going to get very tough, and it is getting very tough very quickly. Michigan and Indiana are on the schedule soon after for Purdue, right? This is a time right now to pick up some routine, easier conference wins in preparation for those big games against top 25 opponents. Like I said, the Big Ten is deep. It's a very difficult schedule no matter how you look at it, no matter what segment of the schedule you look at. We're considering Nebraska a tune-up game, but again, they're 12-2 and very well could win the conference, right? So these are 2 games right now where you're ramping up to some much more difficult tests. Now's the time to pick up some routine, easy conference wins, build yourself a lead against some of those teams in the middle of the pack, skyrocket above the middle of the pack teams in the conference before you have to battle some of the big-time players like Oregon, like Illinois, like Michigan, like Indiana. We'll see if Purdue's able to do that. It's a big-time weekend because, again, you can afford to lose one of these games, but not really when you realize how many more difficult tests you're going to have down the road. You want to be playing your best basketball when you get there, and now's the opportunity to ramp up to playing your best basketball while padding the win column in the Big Ten for yourself. Purdue is lucky their schedule ramps up to those tough opponents. They're lucky they don't just get shocked by them right away. Props to Painter for battle testing out of conference because Purdue has had some big-time games very early on this season. They played multiple top 5 teams at different times throughout the year. I'm impressed by Purdue. It's time to ramp it up against teams in conference before you have the real difficult tests, especially going all the way to Oregon on the 18th. Okay, let's talk about the Pacers. Great timing on this episode right now. 40 minutes in, 4 segments in. Let's talk about the Indiana Pacers. We're previewing a very pivotal weekend. Today is Wednesday. It's 12:20 p.m. on Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. The Pacers have a game tonight. They play the Bulls. Likely, if you're watching this episode, you most likely are watching it after that game has happened. So I don't know what's happened in that game. I'm sure it was just like the Nets game, a routine victory for the Pacers. But they have 2 much bigger games on the way this weekend. It's 3 games of upscaling difficulty. They play Chicago first at home. They're 10th in the East. Golden State is next. They're 8th in the West at last check. And Cleveland, of course, resoundingly is first in the East by 5.5 games over the Celtics. So let's just say theoretically, if the Pacers were to pick up 3 wins, they'd be 22-18. They'd be safely above 500, likely sitting at the 5 seed, because I doubt the Bucks would be able to have that same level of success if the Pacers were to in the next week. They'll have proven they can beat anybody in the East, and that is significant because the Pacers already have wins. I believe at MSG against the Knicks, at the Boston Celtics, they have wins over the Magic. That's number 2, 3, and 4 in the East right now, right? The Bucks they haven't beat yet, but the Bucks are division opponent. They have 2 more opportunities. It's certainly feasible that the Pacers could be able to win a game against the Bucks. But regardless, they've already proven they can beat most teams in the East. They're at least capable of picking off a game against every single one of those teams. The question is, can they do it against the Cavs, right? And that's the real pivot point here, because they play the Cavs on Sunday and again on Tuesday. We're going to have a whole episode entirely on that first Cavs game and previewing the second one, or a whole segment rather, next episode on Tuesday. So the Pacers right now are in a situation where they can really accelerate and put themselves at the 5 seed and mount this winning streak into true tangible success in the standings. But the real thing that's important to me is that one-off game against Cleveland. Can they beat the Cleveland Cavaliers? Are they capable of winning a game against a team that's 31-4 right now? They'll have 2 chances to do it. The best one is the second one, but the first game on the road against the Cavaliers, of course, is occurring on Sunday. Let's talk about the Bulls first, right? Bulls, division rival, technically. They're 17-19. They're 10th in the East. A fringe play-in team. I bet they'll be the 9 or 10 seed. They'll be in that lower bracket play-in game when we get to that point later on in the year. The Bulls are coming off some home wins over the Knicks and the Spurs, which are 2 teams that will definitely as well at least be in play-in range, if not in the official NBA playoffs. The Knicks will be. We're not worried about that. But the Bulls haven't won a road game in regulation since December 19th, when they ironically beat the Celtics. They're capable of picking off strong teams, right? The Bulls have some big wins over some big-time teams, some title contenders here and there. So do the Pacers. So does, it feels like, most teams in the NBA. It's very obviously the Cavaliers have 4 losses. Someone would have had to have beaten them, right? But the Pacers at home have got to hold off a streaking team like the Bulls, right? Again, wins over the Knicks and the Spurs, but they haven't won a road game since December 19th. They go on the road to Gainbridge. The Pacers are streaking as well. The Pacers are winning as well. We'll see if the Bulls are able to pull it off. I don't think they will, but that's an opportunity for the Pacers to prove me wrong. So I hope that ends up being a victory leading into the game on Friday, which will be broadcast on WTHR, which is fantastic. We got that 5-game deal. The Warriors game is the first one. Free on the airwaves. You can just watch the Pacers on WTHR, which is a great, great thing. This is a rematch from a couple weeks ago. It was a solid road win for the Pacers. The Warriors played the Heat last night and lost convincingly. Heat coming off of an overtime loss to the Kings. So the Warriors play Detroit tonight, but they lost to the Heat the night before. So we'll see how that Detroit game goes leading up to this one. They've won 2 out of 3, but they were blown out at home by Sacramento. So recently at home, they've gotten blown away by the Kings. They lost convincingly to the Heat, and they play the Pistons tonight. That's what they have coming up on the Pacers. Last time Miles Turner hit a late 3 to win it. It took a late 3 to win it. They ended up winning by 6. Steph Curry was cold in that game. Kuminga went off for 26. The differences between that game and this one is the fact that this game's at home for the Pacers. Curry has had knee trouble, but he dropped 26 on the Kings, right? So Steph Curry has been working his way back into his groove. He missed the game against the Grizzlies, a victory for the Warriors because of some knee problems. They were just it was a back-to-back. They were just giving him some load management, letting him rest that game. So Curry, he's had some knee trouble. He struggled the last time against the Pacers. Andrew Nembhard is back. He's going to be a great defensive piece for the Pacers. This is an opportunity for another big-time home win, and the Pacers have struggled at home in the last few weeks. They, of course, picked up a couple of big wins this past weekend. We saw the Suns win in particular. Curry, we don't know how well Steph Curry is going to play. We don't know how healthy he's going to be. Andrew Nembhard is back regardless, so hopefully that has a positive impact for the Pacers. It's an opportunity for the Pacers to pick off another probably playoff team or at least play-in team in the Warriors and accelerate themselves in the schedule. And if they pick up those two wins, if the Pacers beat the Bulls and beat the Warriors, I almost don't care what happens against the Cavaliers because that's a team that's 31-4 on the road. They're first in the East by 5.5 games over the Celtics. We talked about how difficult it would be to beat the Celtics. Pacers split the games this past weekend. They've won the series on the season against the Celtics 2-1. However, the Cavaliers are 5.5 games ahead of them right now. So this is another level of play. The Cavaliers and the Thunder are playing another level of basketball. I'm interested to see how the Pacers contend with this team when they'll have two opportunities effectively back-to-back to make it happen. Again, 31-4 team, first in the East by 5.5 games. They're a division rival, but one much improved from last year. The Pacers beat the Cavaliers to start off the in-season tournament last year. Totally different Cavs team. Again, best team in the league right now, best record in the league. They'll play again at Gainbridge on Tuesday and then twice more in the middle of March. So these are the only two real litmus tests they're going to have against the best team in the NBA. Back-to-back Sunday and Tuesday. It's a pivotal stretch for the Pacers, and I'm very interested to see how both those games go. You get a look at them on the road, and then you get to try your hand against them at home in Gainbridge. Division rival, but again, great team in the Cavaliers. They're on a 10-game win streak right now. They score an incredible amount of points. It was going to have to be a shootout if the Pacers can win, especially on the road. Tyrese Halliburton, Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner, Andrew Nembhard, they may all need 20-plus in order to contend with the Cavaliers. That's a tall task, but they have two shots to get this game won. Again, on the road on Sunday and at home on Tuesday. If they can go 3-1 in this stretch, if they can beat the Bulls, beat the Warriors, and win one of those games against Cleveland, I would feel elated, absolutely fantastic about the state of the Indiana Pacers at this time. The Cavaliers, though, again, 31-4, 10-game win streak. They score over 100 almost every game. It feels like it's going to be a difficult spot for the Pacers to win. What I want to point out as well is the Bucks' upcoming schedule, because this weekend they play the Spurs, the Magic, and the Knicks. That's three playoff teams at the moment. That's a prime opportunity for the Pacers to pick up some wins against the Bulls, the Warriors, maybe one against the Cavaliers, and overtake the Bucks for the number 5 slot right now, despite the fact that the Bucks have a tiebreaker and are leading that season series by 2 games. Great opportunity for the Pacers, right? The Bulls win should just be a routine home victory. The Warriors win should be a slightly routine but also very important victory. And then they get 2 cracks at the Cavaliers. Very, very good Cavaliers team, better than any other team in the NBA right now, at least according to record. Pacers are going to have to do a lot to make sure that happens. They're going to have to score a lot to win that game. I'm interested to see if they're going to be able to make that happen for themselves. All right, let's talk about the NFL wildcard rounds. It's today's what? Wednesday, January 8th. We've got NFL playoff games in like 4 days, which is crazy to me because I've been thinking so much about Notre Dame, thinking so much about the Colts and their season ending, the Pacers. The NFL wildcard is just casually happening this weekend. We've got 2 games on Saturday, 3 games on Sunday, and a game on Monday. It's a fantastic playoff field. Especially as the weeks go on. The deeper we get into the playoffs, the more exciting I think it's going to be. I think this divisional round is going to be one of the best weekends of the NFL history. My NFL viewing experience, I think this divisional round, this playoffs, is going to be one of the best weekends of it. Conference championship games, almost no matter how they go down, how they shake out, who's there, they're going to be fantastic, and hopefully we get a good Super Bowl. Because this regular season was a little bit lackluster, and I hope the playoffs can really make up for it. And I think that the deeper we go, the more fun it will get, which is the best part of the playoffs, when every time you think you've seen the best you can possibly receive, you know there's more next week. Chargers, they're favored by 3 at the Houston Texans at 4:30 on Saturday on CBS. Every team is injured, but the Texans have been absolutely gutted. Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, both out, most notably. Houston limped to an AFC South title. They wouldn't be in the playoffs if the Colts were competent or if the Jaguars or Titans were competent. Fortunately, the Texans are in a random assortment of, not random, but you understand what I'm saying. Just they're in the assortment of 4 teams that they're involved in the AFC South. They're the only team that can kind of show up week to week and at least act like a good football team. They were wrecked by Baltimore 31-2 on Christmas. The Chargers have had 3 big wins in a row, not necessarily against good teams, but they've won big, right? They beat the Patriots 40-7, most notably. I think the Chargers are going to win. I think this is a lost season for the Texans. It's never really felt like there's a lot of excitement going into the playoffs because of how injured they are. I feel bad for them. I love the Texans last year. I know I shouldn't. Division rival, shouldn't like them. I understand that. But they were fun, and they were enjoyable. And I thought that they were a Super Bowl contender this year. I called them that before the season started. It just doesn't really seem like the year that they're going to be able to make anything happen because of how injured they are, and the Chargers are playing well. I'll take the Chargers to go on the road against the Texans, win and cover -3. Steelers at Ravens is another one that I really have no doubt about. The Ravens are favored by 9.5. That's at 8 p.m. on Saturday on Amazon Prime, which I find funny. The Ravens, they're undefeated since the bye week. They've 4-0 since the bye week. They're playing incredible. One of those games they played since the bye week is this exact game, Steelers at Ravens, and the Ravens won 34-17. They did lose in Pittsburgh 19-17, I believe, earlier in the year, but most recently in Baltimore, they won by 2 touchdowns. Pittsburgh has lost 4 games in a row. They clinched the playoffs early and just have slid ever since. They had 3 consecutive opportunities against playoff teams, and then they played the Bengals. And the Bengals were hungry, and they have been playing like a playoff team. But those 3 consecutive opportunities against playoff teams, they lost them all, most of which by 2 scores. That includes a game in Baltimore. I think that the Ravens will win this game. I have no doubt about it. The question is whether or not they'll cover the 9.5. It is a division game. Anything can happen. They split the season series. But the Ravens, absolutely, to me, at home, are going to win this game. They're playing great. They're undefeated since the bye week. The Steelers are winless since that same week, I believe, including a loss to the Ravens on the road. In my opinion, the Steelers have no chance, and I'll take the Ravens to win that game. To finish the AFC on Sunday, the Broncos go to the Bills. The Bills are favored by 8.5 at 1 p.m. on Sunday on CBS. This is the widest gap in seeds, but I think it's going to be the most entertaining game. It's the most interesting game to me. I think the Texans are at a lost season. If they win a game, that'll be all they do. Chargers, I think, will win that game handily. I just said how I think the Ravens are the only team with a chance in that game between them and the Steelers. Broncos at Bills, 7-2 is a very interesting game to me. The Broncos are fun, but in meaningful games, they're 1-5 against playoff teams, right? They beat up on everybody below them, and they can't beat anybody above or equal to them, right? They beat the Chiefs, but the Chiefs were resting all their starters. They won that game 38-0. Great momentum to roll into this game with. Buffalo is at home. They're hungry for a Super Bowl. It feels like the year that they can finally do it because they already beat the Chiefs in the regular season. Yes, that game was at home. This time it'll be in Kansas City, but still. The Bills have shown that they can beat the best team in the AFC. There's no one else with a better record than them or even really that close. The Ravens game will be difficult if that happens. The Bills are at home, hungry for a Super Bowl, and the Broncos historically this season have not quite been able to knock off any teams above them, and the Bills are way above them in terms of quality of roster, in terms of competitive nature, in terms of their ability to go to and win the Super Bowl. It may not be the Bills' year, but it's not their time to lose in the wildcard rounds. Broncos, happy to be there. I'm happy they are there. They're a fun team. They deserve it. I think the Bills will win this game, and I think they'll win it handily. So some not very close games, in my opinion, in the AFC. I think the Chargers will win, the Ravens will win, and the Bills will win. Very chalky. I just have the favorites winning in the AFC. But I want to turn our attention to the NFC, because this is where I have a little bit of chaos happening. I think that I have 2 underdogs winning in this round, and the third underdog that I don't have winning very well could. The Packers go to the Eagles at 4:30 on Sunday on Fox. That's the 7-2 matchup. The Packers were the 7th seed last year. They beat an NFC East team in the Cowboys. Very different circumstances. I was surprised that the Packers were the 7th seed. I wasn't quite aware that the Commanders, all they had to do was win to clinch the 6. Really thought this was a year where the Packers were going to be the 6th seed and the Commanders were going to be the 7. Didn't happen that way. So the Packers are going to go to Philadelphia. The Packers, again, they slid down to the 7th seed in the very final moments. They lost 2 division games by 2 in these last couple weeks. They lost to the Bears, which was devastating, and they lost to the Vikings in a close one. They played the Lions close. They lost to them by 3 earlier in the year. In week 1, these 2 teams played. The Eagles won this game by 5 in Brazil. I don't really care because that game was in week 1 months ago, and it was played in Brazil. Now this game is being played in Philadelphia. It's a much more different environment. It's a much more different situation. It's now the playoffs. Jalen Hurts is banged up. The Packers have contended with Super Bowl contenders all year. They lost in Minnesota by 2. They went to Detroit and lost by 3 since the bye week, right? I think the Packers are going to win this game in an upset. I think it's close, but Jalen Hurts is banged up. The Eagles fell apart at the end of the year last year. They made some changes. They worked their way up to the 2 seed. They have a phenomenal record. I believe they won 14 games. I just think this is a spot where the Packers have proven that they can go on the road and hang with division opponent Super Bowl contending teams like the Lions and the Vikings. I think they actually get it done this time, and I think it's partially because Jalen Hurts is banged up. I think it's partially just because of the nature of the Eagles and how hot the Packers are. Yeah, they're coming off a loss to the Bears, but I think that's what fuels them. Much like Ohio State loses to Michigan and then blows up Tennessee, now I think the Packers can have an opportunity to lose to the Bears and parlay that into a victory over the Eagles. I think they get it done. I think the Packers win in advance, and they play the Lions in the divisional rounds on the road. Commanders at Buccaneers is arguably the best game of the entire weekend. I think the NFC games are better than the AFC games. 6-seed Commanders are going to go to Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers. Buccaneers are favored by 3 at 8 p.m. on Sunday on NBC. This is the Sunday night game. People were a bit confused that this was the Sunday night game. I think it's fantastic. I think that this is the best game of the weekend. I'm so excited to watch it. I love Baker Mayfield. I love the Buccaneers. I also love the Commanders and Jaden Daniels, right? I think that everything about this matchup is fantastic. Mike Evans, I love. He hit that incentive in Week 18. That was very good for him. I love Baker Mayfield. I love Jaden Daniels. This is going to be so much fun to watch. Best game of the round, in my opinion. This game happened in Week 1 as well. This is also a Week 1 matchup, and Tampa won by 17. Very different situation, very different teams, really. Jaden Daniels in his first start. You, of course, have Tampa Bay on the other hand. Regardless, it's Week 1. It's a month ago. Both teams were getting into the fold. There's now been injuries. There's now been teams improving, teams sort of falling off in some ways. Buccaneers and Commanders both playing great football right now. The Commanders have won a lot of close games, and that includes close games against bad teams. Sure, they beat some playoff teams throughout the year, but they lost. They beat the Bears barely, right? Took that Hail Mary. The Commanders have won some really close games, and that's significant when you consider how close the playoff race really is. Tampa seems to be more consistent to me. And yeah, they were close against the Saints last week, but Baker Mayfield, more experienced quarterback. He's been in the playoffs before. He's won big playoff games before, specifically with the Browns. And even last year, right, against the Eagles. Jaden Daniels doesn't have that experience. Much of this Commanders team doesn't have this experience. I think this is a year where the Commanders make the playoffs. They lose, but they learn a lot. And they push that into next season where maybe they win the division. Maybe they do even more than that. I think the Buccaneers are going to win this game. I think they'll cover the 3 points, but it will be a close and very entertaining game across the board. I'm excited about the Buccaneers. I'm excited about Baker Mayfield, and I'm excited to see how far they can take this playoff run because I think the Buccaneers are a real dark horse team in the NFC. Another dark horse team in the NFC. You kind of have 2 of them in this game. Number 5 seed, the Vikings, just lost the 1 seed on Sunday Night Football against the Lions. They lost, I believe, 31-9 was the final score. They're favored by 1.5 on the road against the Rams. This is 8 o'clock on Monday on ABC. The Vikings just barely lost out on the 1 seed, like I said. The Rams have been close against good teams. They're similar to the Packers in this way. They've been close against good teams. Went in a complete shootout against the Bills, scored over 40, lost out on that one. Matthew Stafford broke a ton of records, and that team still lost. The Vikings struggled a lot in the red zone in the last game. The Rams have been contending against good teams. They had this game at home. Is that fair? Probably not, but the Rams had this game at home. They won their division. I think the Rams are going to upset the Vikings, and that's maybe the hottest take I have. That's probably an even hotter take than the Packers and Eagles game, although the Eagles have a wider favorability, at least according to Vegas in that game. I think the Rams are going to win. I think the Rams have it in them. I think at home they're going to be capable of pulling together a potential victory. They settled for the 4 seed and they played one of the best teams in the NFC. But the Vikings, just the way they looked last week and the way they have looked recently. Sam Darnold, he's fantastic. He might be a regular season quarterback. I don't know. He might be a regular season quarterback. He might not be the guy to sort of elevate the Vikings in a playoff setting. I think the Rams at home upset the Vikings, and I think that really upsets the rest of the NFC playoffs because if that happens, the Rams would be going to the Buccaneers, and the Packers would be going to the Lions. So the Vikings would be out of the way, right? The Eagles would be out of the way. The Lions would have a clear shot to the Super Bowl because the best team left is the Buccaneers, the 3 seed, 3 seed, 4 seed, 7 seed, and those, of course, the 3 and 4 seed aren't even that high in the NFC standings. They're just there because they won their division. So if my predictions are true, the Chargers would go to the Chiefs, incredible division game in the divisional rounds. Ravens would go to the Bills. Fantastic game. That's an AFC Championship level matchup in the divisional round, which means we'll get another one in the AFC Championship between two teams that are actually there. The Packers are going to go to the Lions, another incredible division game. That game was a 3-point game in Detroit earlier this season. Rams at Buccaneers, great one. Two teams that are happy to be there. One of them has to go to the NFC Championship game, and that's what I think would be compelling. I think the Rams are going to be the Vikings. I think the Buccaneers are going to be the Commanders. I think the Packers are going to be the Eagles. I think the Bills are going to win. I think the Ravens are going to win. I think the Chargers are going to win. And that's how I think the wild card round is going to go. I'm very excited to see it all play out. It's going to be a fantastic weekend and month of football. And that's why I consider the NFL playoffs to be the most wonderful time of the year. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. Good episode. We're right hitting an hour. Notre Dame, tomorrow night. Huge game. Very excited to watch them. Very interested to see how the offseason goes for the Colts. Very interested to see if Purdue takes care of business this weekend. Can the Pacers take care of business this weekend? Can they win some games that are they're very difficult and very, very important coming up? And the NFL playoffs. Really, nationally, the highlight of the weekend is the NFL playoffs. Very excited to see all of those games play out. We've got a stretch of football where Notre Dame plays Penn State on Thursday, Ohio State plays Texas on Friday. We've got 2 NFL playoff games on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, 1 on Monday. We got 5 days of high quality playoff football between the CFP Semifinals and the NFL wildcard round. And it doesn't stop there because divisional round, conference championship, and then, of course, the Super Bowl are not too far off as well. It's a great time to be a sports fan. The NBA is right in full swing, right? The NFL is in its prime with the playoffs. College football is in its prime with the playoffs. Its first season with 12 teams. I'm very excited to see how this weekend goes. We'll talk about it on Tuesday next week. We'll recap the weekends in Indiana. We'll recap the weekends across the board. We'll talk again on Thursday next week as well. Thank you so much for listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. I'm, of course, Andrew Garrison. Show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana. I appreciate you listening, especially if you're listening all the way through to this point, and I can't wait to see you guys again early next week.